Welcome, everybody. This is another session in our series, Fearless Hearts, and we are focused on women in leadership positions in contemplative social action. That's kind of a mouthful, but that's the description of this series. And very selfishly, I have to say, I've been having so much fun with this. It's just been great. We've had a wonderful run of guests. And that continues today. I can tell you. So I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer in just a minute, but I want to just acknowledge and just appreciate. I started at Zen Peacemakers in February of 2020, and I think perhaps the first thing that I did within the first week, I believe, I flew to New York City from Colorado. And there was a dinner that had been arranged by Rami, and I sat between Jennifer and Willie Mooke Smith, and I met Peter Cunningham and Paco and Deborah Stewart, and I forget who else was at that dinner, but it was a delightful way to enter Zen Peacemakers in person, because within a month of that or so, we were all locked down for a year. So I've had the pleasure of being in online events. Jennifer's part of our weekday morning meditation group. We see each other most weekdays, and then a number of other events that have occurred over the last 4+ years. And it's been a real pleasure to have had that in-person experience meeting and so forth, and being able to talk live. It makes the virtual that much richer. So without much more from me, I'm going to turn this over, Jennifer, to you and let you lead us. And once again, thank you all for joining us. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. I'm looking at this wonderful group of people and just thrilled. Some of you I've just known for so long. Can't believe, Eve, you're on, and Ken, you're on. And I'm probably going to miss you because now my screen is cut off into a few people. Many of you are from our women's council that I do. And of course, my partner in much of this work I'm going to talk about, Nancy Miller, where we go back to doing practically everything I've done as a midwife. So Nancy, I hope you will jump in a lot, and without your constant wisdom and leadership and guidance, I don't know that we would have accomplished as much as we tried to do. And anyway, you're always deeply in my heart. So when I speak, much of this will be reflect back on you. I had a hard time with this title, first of all, because I feel like I always, my work is really about reflecting back what I see women and families doing and what I see nurses and midwives doing on behalf of their well-being. So I feel like more I'm a person who's not accidentally, but put myself in many situations where I was allowed to do amazing work, meet amazing people, and learn always. I'm always growing. I always tell everyone I just came from giving a talk to our new nursing and midwifery cohort at Columbia University School of Nursing of 200 people. And I said, one thing about this profession is you're always growing. You're always humbled at how little you know, how much more there is to know, and about the amazing people you get to live your life with. So I'm going to reflect on some of my work in my life, and hopefully I won't talk too long, and then we can maybe just have an exchange, since I feel like this is such a welcoming, wonderful group of people that I get to be with for the next period of time. I always want to start by deep gratitude to Roshi, Bernie Glassman, and Jishu, who were my first teachers when I was fortunate with my late husband, Haywood Burns, to go into what's been the path of my life for the last 30 years. It's actually 30 years ago that I met them with Haywood, drove up to their house in Ashburton and said, "Hi, can we join your community? Can we be with you?" And it's a journey that continues, like my life, to grow and deepen and be a guidance with me. Last week, I was just in Chicago with my older sister, Bernadine, who's both working her way through Alzheimer's and just recently had a stroke. And she said to me, I've done this many times before, but the beauty of not remembering in her case is, she said, "Can you teach me how to meditate?" So we've actually sat and we went through the guidance of it. And that's how life always kind of fits together. And in some ways, she's so in the moment, in the present, even though she doesn't remember that moment, that it's a real beautiful thing to share with her, how we sit and talk about monkey mind and chattering and finding a moment or two of being present is a lifelong goal. And I do think my life's journey, when I looked at doing this talk, is really based on following the three tenets. It really is about not knowing and bearing witness, and then taking action, finding loving right action to take, and a lot of not knowing and a lot of bearing witness, and then moving forward. I grew up in the Midwest. I can't believe I grew up in Milwaukee when I'm looking at Milwaukee right this very minute, for those of you who are in this country, with very conservative, straight parents, an older sister and me, and a very white community. But I grew up in a time of liberation struggles around the world, and particularly the Black Power movement in this country, the women's movement. And my whole life has really been patterned by watching people fighting for equity, fighting for oppressed way, breaking through enslavements, being inclusive. It's kind of guided me since I left home and said I would never come back to that community. And it took me 30 years before I did go back to Milwaukee. But to just really go out and find the world, which was a world of great change, great challenge, and fearlessly stepping off into unknowns, and great building of collectivity values that I treasure to this day. And I knew by the time I finished college that I was dedicating my life to social justice and human rights, whatever form that would take. And when I had my own children in New York, I had home births, and it was like a coming home of, I'm a midwife. I need to be a midwife. And that pushed me to the path of going back to school as a single mom and getting a nursing degree, which I didn't have, and getting a midwifery degree, and starting on this amazing journey of midwifery and working with women and families and communities. And I felt through my own births that there was so much potential for empowerment, so much just going way down into the core of yourself, and then opening up, which is the process of labor, is really going way down to the basic and then opening up. That all women should have this, and all birthing people should have this, should have that ability to have that be a sacred, special time. Whether you're birthing in a field, on the subway in New York, you're in the middle of a war zone, wherever you are, there should be a moment of being protected and guarded and feeling that you're growing and you're powerful to let a new being come into this world. And so that kind of really pushed me of why I chose to be a midwife, and feeling that I always wanted to be. And one of the big things that I first did, that Nancy, you joined me with, is help to build a birthing center in the South Bronx for a great diverse community, and was essentially excluded from good health care. A community that was 99% women and families of color, who right now, Black women in the United States have a 2.5 times rate of dying compared to white women. So this long history of racialization of maternal health as well as our whole healthcare system. But this is the people that needed a great place led by midwives that would reflect their cultures, and where women could come with their families and their mothers and their sisters and aunts and bring their children to run around, be at the births or not, and all led by midwives, all worked with by midwives. It was a great opportunity and much needed change. And that birthing center ran for over 20 years. And we did just remarkable things because the women told us what they wanted to do. You know, that's the thing about health policy, and I think it's true with education, with law, with any of the professions, that we can have all these theories about what needs to be done, but who asks the people that the service is supposed to be for? And turns out we had very verbal women once the door is open to asking, what do you want? There were lots and lots of answers. So we actually formed very quickly what became an advisory committee made of women and partners and members of the community to guide the direction of the birthing center. And we were always in conflict in a great way, in a healthy way of how you go back and forth. So one example, here were a group of women who just treasured that they were getting midwifery care. Had they known about midwifery care 5 years before? Some, but most hadn't, except they knew their mothers or their grandmothers or an aunt had been a midwife from another place in the world or for the South. So they had an image of midwifery as being women's care. They did not realize how much the profession, the science of it, the evidence of it, our practice really was at a very high level to give safe care. So it's combining old traditions as well as a lot of education and a lot of knowledge to really be with women from adolescence to the end of life, long span, and especially in labor delivery. So in there, they'd been at the birthing center having their babies, and they were fierce about thinking they were the protectors of midwifery and safe care. So one example that I tell the people think is interesting. We had a backup hospital at the time, had no midwives. By the time the birthing center ended, they had a full team of 24 midwives, not doing births in exactly the same way, but a very different way than when we started. Anyway, the hospital doctors, they only saw the cases where we had to transfer women at labor because for some reason. So they really only saw issues in labor. They didn't see that the majority of women all birthed at the birthing center, right? And so I would go there and I'd read poems on grand rounds and we'd tell stories, and they probably thought I was a very strange healthcare professional. But at one point, the head of the service, head obstetrician, he said, what if our OBs come to the birthing center and witness normal birth? They've never seen birth out of hospital. What if they come? So I said, oh, interesting. So I go back and we have our advisory council meeting. I said, so the next proposal is that Bronx, Lebanon will send obstetricians to come observe births. And they looked at me, they said, no way. We're not letting a doctor come in here. This is midwives in our families. We're not letting an obstetrician come in here. So I went back, I said, no, we can't do it. And so this went on for like 6 months. I don't remember, Nancy, if you were there during this period of time. So 6 months back and forth. And I thought there actually would be a lot of advantages because they would be pushed in how they give care, the obstetricians, and they would understand us better. They would welcome the women that we had to transfer. So we went back and forth. And so the mothers, they made up a list. They said, well, here are the conditions. So it could be one obstetrician at a time can come. They cannot say a word when they're here. They will only call them by their first name. The mother has to agree to have them at the birth. And these are the things they can do. They can give Gatorade and they can hold legs up when people are pushing, if the woman wants that. That's it. So essentially, you're bearing witness, right? You're going in not knowing, and you're bearing witness to what a birth is, with no power to be in it differently. And so we did this. So the program lasted almost 2 years. And I think it was just really an important example of what happens when the community you serve are empowered. And each of those OBs that did come gave feedback to me for a long time that it actually changed me, then rethink how mechanized their approach to birth was, how medicalized it was. It says, the woman dilating this much. Is she doing this? Is she making noise? Does she need meds? It was very medical, in and out, high cesareans. So there were so many ways that we had impacts. But the beautiful thing about this is that the women themselves felt that their birth experience changed them as mothers, as women, as community members, encouraged them to live out dreams they never imagined doing. And we had great statistics and outcomes. So we had a minimal cesarean rate, even for the women that we transferred. No maternal deaths, no newborn deaths. And it was a model. It was a model that I learned greatly from. I think all of us that work there learned greatly from, and a really honor to be part of. And the center closed for many different reasons. Financial, it became more medical at the end, many different reasons, but the model of it is what's important to me, of looking that this can be done, right? For this is one concrete example of existence in the South Bronx, which those of you who are not in the country or maybe don't know New York, is a very inner city community that's had poverty and devastating HIV, COVID, everything that existed. And it's also been the place that people in forced migration end up being resettled in. Right? Can you imagine being from Vietnam and having been on a boat and being resettled in this community? And then they found the birthing center, right? And we hired a midwife who was amongst them, who was a midwife in Vietnam, to come work with us, so she could really put the customs that people were used to into place. It was just as filled with so many stories. So one thing before I just go on about other journeys in my life is that I always carried the thought that I had to write a book about these women's stories. I wanted them to be remembered forever. I wanted them to be known, because they're all heroes to me. They're all heroes. That book took 20 years to produce, but it came out last December. So there actually is a book, and it reflected also my life changes, because it is 12 oral histories of women talking about their experiences in their lives and their issues about racism and their issues about not feeling empowered and being with midwives and overcoming legacy, such as female cutting and coming to birthing center and have them being respected, overcoming a lot of trauma in lives and finding a new way to go forward in life. So my journey, by the time I sat down to really wrote the book, included doing a lot of global work. So I put in the context of maternal well-being globally, and within this country, and then within the birthing center, and then their stories. So that was, and we had a big book launch at Columbia last December, and I invited all of the women to come, and they came with children from ages 30 on down, and there were grandkids, and I really tried to honor them, make corsages for them. I gave them each a signed copy of the book. We did a lot of pictures, and then we had a panel talking about them. And I had asked them before when they came, I said, will you think of speaking at this? And across the board, they all said no. Well, of course, 10 minutes into the book launch, everyone wanted to talk about their experiences. And they were they were just so heartfelt. And their children were like looking in this book and saying, Mom, you're in a book and your picture's there. And look, this is our story. My name's here and my birth story's here. Anyway, it was really giving back, which is what I think all of our work is about, always about honoring those that are living their lives. And in this case, midwifery and maternal health. So I just wanted to say, to me, it was a coming around circle to actually be able to have the book to give back. And then I use the book now just as a way to be in, for people to learn the lessons of what they taught, what really matters for a healthy birth. My life goes on while I was still working there. I was also director of midwifery at Columbia University School of Nursing, and faced a great tragedy, and that my husband was killed in South Africa in a car accident, working on the new constitution with Nelson Mandela. Very triumphant day for him and a very tragic day, and that he died. And my own journey was one of long journey. Probably, I think you're always in a journey on these things. It's always just learning different and fighting to live a full life and bring him with me. But I always knew I would go back. I would go to South Africa. Part of me was there from Haywood's death, and my journey took a couple of years. But in 2003, I did my first trip to KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Took time off from Columbia to go 6 weeks and do some midwifery work. And this was in the heart of the HIV epidemic there. And the most cases of people getting tested were pregnant women. And the first time I went to a clinic in Durban, 59% of pregnant women were testing positive for HIV. And this is no treatment. Do we have treatment in the United States, antiretroviral? Yes. But the way that pharmaceuticals work, they were not willing to sell them at prices that could really be distributed in many countries in the global South. So began a journey that then Nancy joined me and then really led with Jens, and they both knew a lot about HIV, and I quickly learned from you as much as I could about HIV. And we worked with the midwives, helping train so that they could really be leaders in getting pregnant women in early tested, and then as antiretrovirals became available, onto treatment. And that was amazing. I worked in South Africa itself, going back and forth from 2003 to 2010, just going back on summers, going back for little bits. I think, Nancy, you took other pieces of time to go and do longer work. With HIV, the midwives were infected, their kids were infected. It didn't stop anywhere about who had this. And there was, at the time, the government in South Africa was promoting a policy that this didn't exist. HIV didn't exist, and you could cure it by taking beetroot and all kinds of very awful cases. And one haunting thing was being in a rural area and going down a small dirt path. And the first way you'd know you were coming to a village was the wooden coffins for sale, with someone having made them and selling them before you got into that town. Over the years that I worked there, and that Nancy and Jens worked there, from 2003 to 2010, there was legislation passed that nurses and midwives could initiate antiretroviral treatment. That's a major victory. And antiretrovirals were available. And they were available because India produced them, Brazil produced them. Other countries broke through this blockage on not getting prescriptive rights and all the controls that there are on medicines. And it was distributed, and it was the real marking of change for turning around this horrific epidemic in South Africa, and then throughout much of sub-Saharan Africa. In my own life, I want to say one of the things about learning and being there was that I was also on a healing journey, and people had so much death, and I was one other person grieving, and I was welcomed. It wasn't like there was a verbal talk about it. It's hard to maybe explain, but I think any of you have had great loss. Sometimes people around don't exactly know how to deal with us, right? We don't know exactly the words to say. Most of you just want someone to be around. You don't need them to say. In my own time, there was really a way of not knowing and bearing witness and taking action about my own grief and finding new life in the midst of what could be called this devastating environment of death. But I did that because the midwives were finding life and the communities were finding life because there was suddenly hope. There's hope that it could be done differently. A lot of work, a lot of fight. But I remember one of the midwives that Nancy and I knew well, she would say, I tell the pregnant mothers, you have to come and get tested, and you've got to do your antenatal visits because you've got a new baby coming, and this is a virus, but it can't determine your life. You've got to go forward, going door to door to bring people in because the pregnant women were so stigmatized in the beginning, wrongly so, completely wrongly so. So that's another whole that molded me forever. I mean, that was like the birthing center in what I learned and what I oftentimes felt I'm not really giving anything back. But, every time I went back, the people said, you came back. That's the most important thing. You came back. You showed up again. You didn't have to bring a big grant and you didn't have to bring whatever, but you came back to be with us, to just be with us on the line of feeling bellies and listening to fetal heartbeats and going through birth and welcoming a new baby. And then watching it change from women knowing they had a death sentence and probably would never get to raise this baby to watching women get antiretroviral treatment and then knowing they could have a full life. 2010, I ended up being part of being awarded a huge nursing grant to work in what ended up being 10 countries on the African continent with nurses and midwives around primary care, capacity building, and around HIV. And I thought I'd never want to step outside of South Africa because that was my base. And it turns out I fell in love with every place I've been working and continue to work because it's the same. It doesn't matter if we speak the language, you open to customs, to learning new ways that people think and approach health. And there have been amazing people, amazing midwives, nurses, amazing families coming and wanting the best, wanting the best for themselves and their families, right? Wanting the human right to have health at the highest attainable level in a world that does not fight for that, in a world that has great disparities and inequities. So just kind of a little bit more, and then we'll just stop since it's, I want to hear or engage with you more. So I worked in going back and forth many countries, Dominican Republic of Congo, Eswatini, that was Swaziland, Lesotho, Zambia, Malawi, Kenya, Nigeria, and then one of them has been, as I said, an amazing experience in building lifelong relationships. And when I finally came back to the School of Nursing, where I've been for the last 10 years, and continue to build global work, it's mostly been for students and having students have the opportunity before they graduate as nurses and midwives to be under the leadership of the nurses and midwives that I met in work in the countries that I've been in. And they're almost all in global South countries. They're in countries that have great disparities and inequities and are constantly modeling resilience, the incredible ability to come back, go forward, stay stuck in thinking there is no way forward. And so I've been here, and I still go to many countries. I just got back from the last 3 months. I was in the Gambia, and then Ghana, and then Jordan. And Jordan was incredibly moving. They're opening a new midwifery program, so I came to talk about my experiences and mostly just serve as a voice as they go forward building it. And it was also being an Eastern Mediterranean country, and a country where almost everyone I work with is rooted in being Palestinian along their lineage. And the kindness and the openness and the wanting peace, and the belief that this will happen. And it's not frustration, anger, yes, but mostly just solidarity and wanting peace, to reach out to the many people that they've worked with over the years. And I found that very peaceful. It wasn't, quote, a taking a side. It was just feeling like we've been here, we'll continue to be here, we're going to go forward. And in my own work, it's just as watching how people, and I know we talk about this a lot in the ZPI, about how to, I won't say it as well as you do, Eve or Jeff, but how we find a place to be for peace, be wanting conflicts to end, be wanting people to have a full life. And it doesn't have to be a rigid division. I struggle with this all the time, so I'm probably not saying the best words, but being there is actually very centering to me, to feel like I could, in my own growth, at least sitting, understand better what it means to live a full life in this time of great challenge. So maybe I'm wandering too far off, but those are some of the stories of my life, and I'd really rather switch, if it's okay with you, Jeff, switch into some more dialogue, or if you want me to explore something more. It feels very strange to just have me here, and I have all these wonderful people that I've learned from all these years.
Jennifer, perhaps to give you a bit of a break, maybe we can open for questions and comments for a while, and then if you want to pick it up again after a little bit,
or maybe something I want to answer longer than shorter. But
right.
There's just such great gratitude, and I tell you, this last 30 years, and probably long before I had a name to it, that I've been rooted in my Zen practice. And I do want to just give you hats off to you, Jeff, because when the pandemic came, and we're now so used to being on Zoom, but and I found out that Jeff has had a daily sit. So this is 4+ years. He gets on General Mountain Time, and he's on for half an hour. And you can come and go. You can come in late, and he's usually kind enough to let you in. It's just like there's it's my Zen practice. Even my grandkids come, and they often appear on the screen. They run in and out when I'm with them and sit. But just to have this grounding, has been remarkable, Jeff. A great gift of love and kindness and generosity to all of us.
So let's thank you for that. So let's open for a few minutes of questions and comments. And I would like to, and I hope I'm doing this too. I would like to encourage all of the English first language speakers to be as careful as we can to try to speak slowly and avoid colloquial references and so forth. Not everyone here is English is their first language, so we want to make sure we communicate. So with that, if anybody has questions or comments for Jennifer,
or a story about,
or a story, Annie, thank you.
Hi, thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was just wonderful. Heartbreaking to hear this. Just beautiful. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of the Western model for teaching childbirth, did you find that transferred over easily to the countries you were working in? And did that allow you enough resilience to adapt to their ways of doing birthing?
Well, I've never come up with the idea that we hold the way, we being Western medicine. And you know, when I talk about approaches to healthcare, I have worked in many places where there is no hospital. And I've had midwives in groups, you know, we're talking and then they'll say, maybe you can finally answer this question. And most of the time, not in English and other languages, you know, maybe you can answer this question. And they'll say something like, what do you do when the placenta comes first? And Nancy, as you know, and any other healthcare professional here, it's a bleed out for the mother, maybe life if there's can get to a quick cesarean, and death for the baby. You know, and here people are asking me, and I say, I'm saying there's nothing really we can do. That's why we have to fight to get access to hospitals. You know, so I feel like that's part of the bigger thing about one way of thinking about it. I am really grateful that we have hospitals all around, and that we can get to them. But I do not think the approach to healthcare in this country, at least, is one that's public health. There is no universal health coverage, so not everyone can get healthcare. You get discriminated against right from there. And it's not a public health, meaning healthcare starts in the community. You work your way up to hospital when you need, and then you work your way back. Women we had to transfer who became higher risk or needed a birth in a hospital or needed a cesarean section, soon as they could, they came right back to us. And we did all the follow-up care. So, you know, so that's one piece of really appreciating. I just want to reorganize how the healthcare team is, so it's not hierarchical of doctors over other completely by healthcare workers. It should be a collaborative team. And I think, you know, birth and death, the great passages, the great transitions, every culture, because there's so much mystery and unknown to it, every culture develops its own approach to it, has its own respectful ways of looking at it. And we can always be learning how that's approached. And if you close that off, we end up very quickly on a medical route. So one of the things Nancy and I and the other midwives would quickly ask people when they came to the birthing center. I mean, here you had a true mixture of people from African countries, people from the Caribbean, people from the South, people from inner city, and then expanding to Bangladesh, Vietnam, Mali, Eastern Africa, which brought women who've had female cutting done on them as young people, Central America, South America, all these countries, women were there. And you'd say, you know, what is the custom? People who grew up in the United States really almost didn't know the question, didn't know how to answer it, but come back a week or two later and they had talked to Aunt so-and-so who lived in another place. And she said, oh, we always did this. And you have to have the soup after you birth. You know, you have to have this, or you have to do this. Or people who from Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic or Cuba, I'll go to the botanicas. I ask all my nursing students, we live in Washington Heights. It's a Latino community. Who's been to a botanica? And 99% have no idea what the word is. Well, botanica is a store, a little storefront store that has herbs and all kinds of ritual healing practices. And if you don't know that, well, first of all, you got your teachers right in front of you. That woman and her family can teach you if you ever ask. tell me where you go for healthcare. If you don't ask, they're having several kinds of healthcare. They may be going to an acupuncturist. They may be going to the botanica and getting herbs. They may be getting a different treatment. In South Africa, it was the shamans who were doing cutting as a ritual on women's bodies to get rid of HIV. And, they didn't really break through education about HIV in South Africa, in my opinion, until the shamans were brought in. So you could have their teaching be expanded to be safer, right? And yet contain part of a long tradition. So what was wonderful about the birthing center is once you opened the door for people either already had their traditions, they just had never been asked, didn't get to do it, or people who didn't know suddenly found their traditions and then wanted to do them. There was a mosque a couple of blocks away. So, went and met with the leader of the mosque, who ended up having all of his children at the birthing center. But he agreed to come in if a family wanted, with elders after birth, and pass the baby around and do a ritual of praying. We did male circumcisions for children, babies who was part of their culture. And the imam could come to the center if we wanted, or they could come, at the time of birth. So usually the father could put a date on the baby's lips and whisper the words of Allah to the baby. Just things that make it their birth and this baby's marking. And they're not hard to learn. You have to want to ask people, right? Just in all the work that we do, you have to ask people. Ken, I'm thinking of all your years as an educator and how you learn to teach, because you find out what parents are doing and what kids are doing and how they approach it, and then you blend it. So this was very much looking at how all these traditions can come, but not just traditions, they're beliefs about birth that are very important. And they do involve sometimes, you have to work with things that are not healthy, but most of the things are. We had women who had female cutting. Several of them, I know I did work on their documentation, so that they could get citizenships here, or work with them so that their daughters wouldn't be sent back. Joined a women's group in Harlem that was protesting, working actively, organizing against female cutting in the countries that they came from. So it's not like you just honor all these traditions, you sort out what's healthy for people, and then be part of helping people heal. And people who had something like that, experience it as they affected their whole lives, really learn how to give them the best care. I remember going to this backup hospital with documents about how to help a woman birth who's had different levels of cutting done. And none of the doctors had researched it. Instead, a woman would be there in labor and they would bring 10 new med students in to examine her. Can you imagine the disregard, the disrespect for people under the way of learning? So I went off on a long story. That's what I said, Jeff. But it is part of, it's all there if we are open to not knowing and to bearing witness, and then finding out what we could do differently. It's staying grounded in it.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks, Jennifer. And Eve has her hand up, and I want to point out to everybody else, I can't see everyone. So if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, you can raise your electronic hand down under React. And as Eve just did. Hi, Eve, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Eve, a big hug.
Yeah, me too. Wow. Yeah, I get your missives from so many different countries, and I'm always so stunned by the scope and the vision of your work. And yeah, I'm just beside myself with admiration. Really, really.
It's mutual.
I do want to ask you, So, I mean, not everybody knows, but of course, your sister Bernadine is really well known for, in some, also for working on peace and justice issues, but she seemed to have chosen a different course. And at least from everything that I read, and I didn't read that much, but she's really almost a heroine in the movement around, you know, being almost taking almost violent action, very, very tough action to change the status quo. And it was really interesting. And so it seems to me that you're two sisters and you went in one direction and she went in another. At least that's how it seems to me. So I've always been, and I think we once touched on this 25 years ago.
Probably.
You have a sister who spent years in prison and all that, but so you went in different directions, and I've always been very curious about that and how that happened and how when you talk, what comes up.
Well, the short answer is she only went to prison she was here in prison for 3 months in New York for not testifying in front of a grand jury. Many of our colleagues and friends did life, and some died in prison and some are getting out after 40, 45 years. And I don't, it's interesting. There's a lot of difference and there's not. I mean, I supported a lot of the things they were. I was a public spokesperson for what they were doing. On the other hand, I've always had a streak that was very spiritual, and she never has, that grounded me in not wanting violence. So, we came out of the same parents. My parents were always amazed that they produced 2 people who they considered super radical. How on earth did that happen in one family? And, just even my story about her saying meditation, she's respected that I have a very different inner life than she does. It's not really answering your question. I mean, I never denounced what they did. Did I fight some of it? Sure. They also were very careful not to harm anyone. And that was a line of, would do symbolic actions, but they shouldn't be involved in violence against people. Maybe that's too much of an edge for where we're going with this, but families are fascinating. She's the older sister, and we end up, having so much similar lives and also very different lives. I mean, the fact that she became a lawyer and has done great work while she was practicing around juvenile justice, and I became a midwife. They're very different. They're both service industries, and they're also kind of very different about what you do day in and day out. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. So to me, we've just, we've had differences over the years, and we are sisters, and we have absolutely always been there for each other. So that's what's fascinating about families, and here I am now with her 3 years into Alzheimer's. And as I said in the beginning, just having had a stroke, and Jeff knows we say her name every Thursday on our healing list. And she's off into a very different journey, and still is a lot of her in it, and a lot of joy and laughter. And I'll probably get very emotional now because I really have a safe space to let it out. And it's, it's hard to find much that's nice about this disease or about dying. We're supposed to be embracing aging, and we try in our own ways. And a lot of it is just hard stuff. And she's still at the stage where she and I last week, we had to talk about Alzheimer's and what it meant. And I kept telling her, you're so dignified. You're doing this with a lot of bravery. And then probably not 10 minutes later, she won't remember that I said that, but she can hear it when I say it. It's truly being in the present. So she said, oh, could I meditate now? Because she saw a video that meditation helps Alzheimer's. So I'm thinking, well, okay, she's let me do this through our parents' deaths. She always says, what ritual? I said, well, we can't touch anyone. When they're dying, we can't hold them back. She lets me do all of these things, and I read our prayers, and but it's, more like she accepts me doing it. I thought this is going to be very interesting to actually meditate together. I don't know what her mind is doing, and yet she's very in the moment, except she never remembers the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting words, right? So I veered off of your thing, but they're really, we never had a big schism. That I was more into a lot of what she did, and then I also got out in a different way. And she's kind of always declared herself as, an atheist. And so I'm saying, but meditation doesn't matter. It's the center of it all, right? It's the center of how we live life. It's a way of life, is how I see it. And you can have many other beliefs, right? And still be an active Zen person. So we have great respect for each other. I mean, do I think some of the things that they did in the beginning were crazy? Absolutely. Does she? Absolutely. You live long enough and you look back and you think, oh my God, what on earth were we doing? But underneath that all, there was such a passion about freedom and liberation and ending such an oppressive system. And that's still kind of in my work and became in her work too. That basic ethical morality of how we see it, and somehow we both ended up with a huge amount of energy to just keep going out and doing it as long as we can. So there's a lot more similarities than differences, I think, is what I'm saying at the end.
Okay. Thank you very much, really.
Love you.
Thanks, Eve. And
Nancy.
my friend Nancy,
Nancy's-
if you have your hand up.
Nancy's got her sweet hand up there. Hi.
Hi, Jennifer. It's great to see you. So I want to thank you for this talk and for all of the several junctures in my life where you have been really significant. First, my coming to the birth center as a new midwife, and you're convincing me that this is where I had to be. I remember that.
I was right. I was right.
But talking today within the context of Zen peacemakers, and it's just the three tenets are just popping up all over the place, from having midwifery knowledge and the knowledge of the complications that could happen as a container for this woman to birth, knowing that, but not imposing it, not imposing the fear or so to let her do her process is a piece of not knowing and bearing witness, and then right loving action with her, whatever that is. And I know that there were many women who, had they been in the hospital, would not have gained their power, would not have had the healing. I'm thinking of several women who had, young women, even teens, who had been sexually abused, where we could provide the container where they could work through, even in labor, some of their trauma. And they would have been not allowed to do that in the hospital. They would have been drugged. They would have been, I don't know, But and then going to Africa is again going into a situation of not knowing, of bearing witness, and of right action. Jens and I spent most of our time in Africa in Lesotho implementing HIV treatment programs within the government system. And it was always going in with that, not knowing who we were going to be working with, not knowing how it was going to be, but we were way up in the mountains in really rural areas, 4 hours and 75 miles on a rock and rut road, and
Or a horse.
or a horse. Right. I actually took some horseback riding lessons in the middle of that. But so that was more working with midwives and with nurses who were providing the care and going in and with the not knowing and bearing witness to these midwives and nurses who were very well trained, but working in very harsh and very difficult circumstances to bring HIV care to their people. And they did it beautifully. The one clinic that Jensen and I spent most of our time with and helped them start their first person on antiretrovirals when I was back in 2015 had 2,500 people on treatment. And it was all about working step by step of what they had to do, of working again with the not knowing how was this going to fit in to what they could do and with their culture and moving from there. And so, I want to thank you and, the Zen peacemakers of, somehow it's like I didn't know those three tenets back then, but there they were. And right now, having a context for putting that all together is long, over many incarnations is really wonderful. And yeah, Jennifer, just, all of your keeping on, going back and back and back to Africa is just amazing. And the influence that you have had on people's lives over the years. I haven't gotten the book yet, but I will do it and read it and recognize and remember.
Yes, you'll know all the women.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy. Does anyone else have a question or a comment?
Molly does.
I don't see, who is that?
Molly.
Molly,
Doug.
please go ahead, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Molly.
I'm a psychotherapist and a teacher training in vocal work outside of language. And I'm hearing the three precepts in a different way because I'm called now to work with dying. And one of the things that is really moving up for me is how the precepts work with the practice that I am hoping to implement more in other systems, including including hospitals and nursing and of course hospice, is the old practice in the lamentation and making sounds to help the body voice move the energy over the bridge of leaving the body. And this has been traditionally, as I think you know, I see you nodding, all over the world, particularly in indigenous cultures where it hasn't been stifled and put into boxes. It's been a pass along tradition in families for someone to be able to make sounds that help other people to release. And so thinking of the three precepts as you've talked about birthing, I think about my own birth experience, which was early on in the 60s in a fancy New York hospital in Columbia Presbyterian. And I was in theater then, and I had great health care and was in a special room. And so people had no idea what I was doing when I wanted natural birth. And I remember a gaggle of nurses coming in. And I could hear down in the ward a lot of women. This was right on the edge of Spanish Harlem, and a lot of people were, a lot of women were having very vocal births, and and one of the nurses, and I was doing my Lamaze, being very careful about only me, like breathe, 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 don't sound, breathe, breathe, the little engine that could stuff. And I wanted to just let my body go, but I didn't know that then, and I was told not to. And what the nurse said to the nurses behind her who were in training, I think about, the doctors bringing in people looking at women who had cutting, was they don't pay them any attention, my dear. They don't know what they're doing. And I wanted to say, fuck you. I want to scream and make the sounds that my body makes. Anyway, that story. So the whole idea of not knowing when you go outside of language, I'd really love your comment on this. Both of you, all of you. When you go outside of language, you're going into not knowing because you're going out of the cognitive box. And it's very scary for people. You've attended, but it's very scary to hear those sounds and to be able to be present and hold those sounds for other people. We're not supposed to make those sounds. And in dying as in birthing, there is the presence of the body needing to make the sounds, and there's the not knowing. And the bearing witness and holding, being able to hold and be with people who are making this birth passage at the other side of the circle. And into the action of being there. So, the banshees, go Google banshee in the Celtic tradition, and you'll see this, this terrible, elder, scary woman who is holding these sounds and making these sounds terrifying. And so, a lot of that got shut down. I wonder if you have a comment about this. I'm not sure.
Just a short comment. First of all, is deep bows to your work and your practice. It's really, I know you do know this, but it really is an honor to be with people birthing and people dying. It's a very sacred place and should not ever be taken lightly. And people who do that, deep respect. So I just want to acknowledge your path, and you're continuing to expand your path. Birth is all about sound. The interesting thing, and it's about letting it out. I mean, I know when I go on a labor ward, I know if I'm in New York City and there's no noise, and that's because everyone has an epidural, and then you're silenced. And if one woman is making noise, I hear someone shouting, she must need an epidural. It's like not polite to make noise. The interesting thing about making noise, and especially with women, it's not okay to be loud. It's not okay to all of these things of what our taboos are about who we're allowed to be. The interesting thing about there's noise when you're frightened, and there's noise when you're working, and they're very different. So if you're in a place and no one in your dying, I imagine, or you're birthing, and no one is telling you this is normal and you're okay and you're powerful and you can do this, you scream. Screaming is a protective instinct, right? We scream when we're frightened, right? We don't think I'm going to scream now. It just comes out of you. Women in the birthing center. Now, I want to describe women who came to the birthing center had not necessarily read everything possible on the internet. There wasn't even internet for a lot of it, about where to birth and who you're going to get. They came because they heard we were good. We were kind people. And then they learned another whole world. Once they came in the door and saw the artwork and saw, the food that was being cooked for the day and everything, they saw the different world. But creating a safe space, women make all kinds of wonderful noise, and but they're not screaming. I don't know, Nancy, if you remember, but women did not scream. Women make a lot of good noise. You got to make noise to push. It's guttural, your body, because you're not in your brain. It's your body working hard. And then at the end of a contraction, you take a breath and you say, great, look at what you just did. and then you get ready for the next one. It's not, so there's different noises. And I think that they need to come out and they need to be respected. And if someone is really screaming in terror, that woman needs even more comfort to say, it's okay. It's okay. I just want to say, that's just a comment about when you said the noise, because birthing and dying are noisy events. We make noise at basic functions. It's not in our brain. Person that I've been with, the people dying who think I'm dying on my next breath, nor is a woman who's feeling this burning rage on her perineum and about to have this gorgeous little head come out of her. Think this is what you're at a very different level, and that's why respecting that, making it sacred. I don't care if you're in the middle of a hospital, or on the subway. I've birthed so many women birthed in cars who drove up to the center, and we opened the door and there was the taxi driver mortified, and the partner saying, we just need this. And out came the baby right there saying, okay, so quiet, let the woman make it. Anyway, it's a great use of a description. But I think there's a difference between screams of terror, noise of terror, and noise of being at that level of your body, whatever it's doing.
Thank you. And I'll turn the word wheel here and say the difference between noise and sound is the body really makes very specific sounds according to what it needs. And the joining, the witnessing, the joining the sound with a woman or with anyone at either end of the scale is a way of holding hand, of being really, really present. And bringing it into a whole different context of the body wisdom. Thanks. I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Molly.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Anyone else? I can't see all the hands.
I think we might be near the end.
I might want to squeeze one in here, Jennifer, if you don't mind.
How could I mind with you doing? And Barbara's got her little hand up there too. So how
good.
could I? And you told me about your births, so I know about your births.
Oh, I've already mentioned to you. Well, maybe for the sake of everybody else, we worked with midwives at home 38, 40, and 44 years ago. And we were devotees of Ina May Gaskin and Mothering Magazine back in the early 80s. And but culturally we were outliers. And we're really warned by lots and lots of people. Not my mom. My mom said, no, you'll be fine. I was born at home in 1924 in Colorado, but so many other people thought we were being really reckless. And I don't want to have this be about me. My question is, how has that landscape changed in 40 years? Is it more integrated with the medical, or is it still balkanized kind of and at odds? Or
so it depends on if you're talking about the United States or other countries.
Yeah, my experience is only here. So
yeah, and just one thing about global, most people birth at home because they can't get to skilled provider. It's not a choice. It's what happens. It's not this. We have a glorified image of home birth in this country that you and I participated in, but that should be, and I love birthing at home, but you need skilled attendants. And in most countries, people birth at home and the level of death is huge.
yeah.
So most countries, Rwanda made it illegal to birth at home. Ethiopia made it illegal to birth at home, but you have to have a skilled clinic nearby with someone in it whenever that person arrives and the equipment. So in this country, most midwives, great bulk of midwives work in hospital because we don't have a good, so that's the main landscape. We don't have a good community-based healthcare system. There's very few birthing centers. They keep getting closed and then they'll be opened again. And people who choose to birth at home are really usually very alternative people seeking out a different way to do it and can get a midwife and will probably have a wonderful birth. But the majority of people, in the South Bronx, people said, why didn't you do a home birth service? I'm thinking, no one wanted a home birth service. Most of the apartments, there were several different families living in it, many people. you started a contraction. You wanted to be in the birthing center so that you could be quiet and get to work. You did not, you know, it's just different needs. And certainly there was no glorification of home birth. But midwifery struggles always. And I feel like the grip of modern obstetrics and the further medicalization. I mean, one quick example is that because the issue of racism within our healthcare system has gotten raised so hard, and maternal health, and you have examples like Serena Williams, it's across economics, you know, where she almost, you know, went into eclampsia post-delivery and no one listened to her and almost died. And she had the highest level of care, you know, possible. But why? Why wasn't she heard? You know, why wasn't Tori Bowie, the sprinter who was found dead at home with 30 weeks? Why did this happen? So I feel like what's happened, at least where I'm seeing it here at New York and at Columbia Presbyterian now, is that it's further medicalizing birth. So if you're a Black woman pregnant and you come into Columbia Presbyterian, you're put into a certain category to get more and more and more and more testing to show that that'll give better outcomes. Well, isn't that kind of a same continuation of you get classified not by your history, the objective things, but by race? You get put into this category of this is the treatment that's medicalized, and it's been proven over and over and over again by world standards. You know, you should expect in a population at least 90% of women can have physiologic normal births. More than 10% getting cesarean section, something's wrong with how you're classified. This is assuming women get prenatal care, right? You know, so now in this country, we've stayed at 35% cesarean section rates for the last 20 years. You know, what does that mean? So I feel like, you know, what does that mean? I'm educating more midwives. We're going to keep doing it. I keep encouraging them. But here, to get a midwifery education, you only learn medical. None of them have worked in a birthing center before they graduate. None of them have been outside. That's why I do global. They can at least go see midwives working in a healthcare center and doing, it's a maternity center, not like the birthing center, you know, and 40 or 50 babies are born a day and people go home early. And there's obstetricians nearby and there's the capability of doing a cesarean section. That's safe birth. So that's, you know, it's just, you know, the battle continues. I don't think it's going to break until there's a real revisiting and a public health approach to our whole healthcare system, as opposed to this very tiered for-profit system.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Nancy, you got one last comment there?
Actually, Barbara, did you have your hand up before?
Oh, Barbara did. Sorry. Barbara, come back. There you are.
Nancy will come back to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your beautiful talk, for your incredible, important and beautiful work. I gave birth to 5 children. I had the chance to have very easy, natural giving birth. And I just, I appreciate so much what you said, that it's always such a deep initiation to give birth. I experienced it like that, and such a deep empowerment also. And it's really a sacred moment. And so my daughter-in-law is also a midwife, and she works only in birth centers. She can't work in the hospital. And I think it's so important really to do whatever we can, that women can give birth in a natural way when it is possible. So listen to you makes me so happy. And I really have such a deep appreciation for your work. It's so important. We are all born and the half of population are women, and so many of them give birth. So your work is incredibly important, and so I wish you the best for your
Thank you
to make that possible more and more, and for so many women in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jenny.
Thank you.
Nancy, you want to go ahead?
Well, I just wanted to tag on to Jennifer's talking about the medicalization of birth in this country. My big issue the last number of years has been around abortion. And with the Dobbs decision, I think there's been even more fear around birth because women cannot get the care in many states that they need around pregnancies that are very wanted, but that go wrong somehow. And women are dying. And so women are dying and having a lot of getting much sicker than they need to get before they get the care that they need. So I think that it's fueling a lot more fear around birth. I know of one woman in my community who moved to New York, and part of her decision-making process had to do with the fact that she wanted to get pregnant and have a baby, and she wanted to be in a state where she knew that she could get the care that she needed if there was a problem. And she chose then to come to New York. So there's that whole issue, and I don't want to get on my bandwagon about that, about abortion and the abortion bans, but abortion is healthcare and is part of a broad public health standpoint of bringing safe care to women, but also that the whole issue has created such fear for women around pregnancy and around and that it's the states that have the highest maternal morbidity and mortality that have abortion bans. And so that's going to make it worse. And OBGYNs and birth attendants are fleeing those states in droves. So it's creating a really awful situation. So I think about that, about wanting women to understand that birth can be a natural, beautiful, empowering process and a rite of passage. And yes, of course, they have to get through their fear, but our culture is fueling that fear in so many ways. And I feel so sad about that. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Jennifer, do you want to take over for a little bit, or do you want to keep it open for questions? Or
We should close. I don't have more to say. I'm just, I'm so grateful to talk to this community, and I've been honored and am honored to have continual learning, and humbled that I get to be of use, and that I am on this journey that every time, I thought the birthing center, that was my greatest thing I ever could do in my life. And then South Africa called out of a tragedy, and then I had another great thing. And now I'm here watching hundreds of future nurses and midwives get global health disparity and equity and fight for justice and reproductive justice. So it's kind of amazing. I don't know what the next big one is, but it's kind of amazing that you just don't know. And that life keeps opening as long as you're willing to not know.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And we promise to have you as a guest again when the new chapter unfolds. So.
Thank you. Thank you. I really am so grateful. This is like a homecoming, because I know some of you, a lot of you, I only know from being on Zoom. In fact, most of you, a few of you, right? I know from our person time together. But anyway, it's wonderful. I felt very safe and protected and excited to be with all of you. So thank you.